The last time I had the dream, I was walking down the school hallway. And that's when I started to notice that something's wrong. Everyone I cared about has been systematically replaced. And finally, I want to scream, and I'm like, why are they replacing every single character with someone who is diverse?
One major development going on now involves more to do with Rachel Zegler and her attitude towards South Park Studios and Paramount after learning about what they are planning for their upcoming special called the DEI Special.
Could a cartoon really derail a Disney movie before it even hits theaters? It sounds like something out of a movie itself, but buckle up, because the unfolding story of Disney's new Snow White remake is rapidly turning into a real-life fairy tale of disaster. We're not just talking about the usual online grumbling or predictable pre-release jitters. This is a full-blown Hollywood meltdown, fueled by controversial public statements, whispers of behind-the-scenes drama, and almost unbelievably, a savage skewering from the animated comedy powerhouse South Park. This isn't just about bad press, it's a potential PR avalanche that has some wondering if this remake is doomed before anyone even buys a single bucket of popcorn. Get ready, because the story of how Snow White went from fairy tale princess to pop culture punchline is wilder than you can imagine.
In addition to that, there was already an uproar about her being cast as Snow White because she is not Caucasian, she is a Latina, she is half Colombian, and so people were like, why were you cast in the first place?
Exactly what they're doing, and that is why we hate the diversity, equity, and inclusion casting and writing in movies.
The seeds of this cinematic storm were sown the moment Rachel Zegler was cast as Snow White in Disney's 2025 reimagining of the timeless classic. Initially, there was a wave of cautious optimism, a curiosity about how Disney would update a story so deeply embedded in animation history. But that quickly morphed into something far more contentious when comments attributed to Zegler herself began to surface. She didn't just suggest a few tweaks or modern updates, she seemed to actively dismiss the very core of the original 1937 animated masterpiece. Words like outdated were thrown around, and even more shockingly, the iconic Prince Charming, a character synonymous with fairy tale romance, was, in her view, essentially a stalker. These weren't nuanced critiques delivered in academic circles, they were sound bites that ignited a bonfire of fan outrage. For many, it felt like a direct attack on a cherished cultural touchstone. Longtime devotees of the original film and even casual moviegoers intrigued by Disney's latest attempt to reinvent a beloved story felt alienated and disrespected. The internet predictably erupted. Accusations flew. Disrespect for a timeless classic, misunderstanding of the source material, and a general sense that the actress, and perhaps Disney itself, fundamentally missed the point of Snow White. Before the promotional machine even properly whirred to life, the narrative was set. Controversy had arrived, and it was here to stay.
Snow White is the first American feature-length animated movie, 1937. It's one of the most beloved movies of all time.
Our rights are on the line, folks.
Bitch! The right to buy Cosby sweaters?
Come on.
Because of the face of a serial killer.
And if you disagree with this sentiment, just hit the unfollow button.
But the initial wave of fan backlash, potent as it was, proved to be only the opening act in this unfolding drama. Soon, whispers began to circulate, not just about public perception, but about the inner workings of the Snow White production itself. The rumors centered around behind-the-scenes friction and specifically a rumored feud between Rachel Zegler and her co-star Gal Gadot, who plays the iconic Evil Queen. Suddenly, the narrative expanded beyond audience disapproval to include whispers of on-set tension and a potentially toxic working environment. Reports of creative clashes and personality conflicts began to leak, painting a picture of a production far from the harmonious fairy tale image Disney usually cultivates. Then came the real fuel to the fire, an awkward public non-appearance. Rumors swirled that at a major industry event, the two actresses not only avoided interacting, but actively went out of their way to maintain distance, creating a palpable sense of icy animosity in the room. This wasn't just typical Hollywood gossip fodder, it was a very public display of alleged discord that added a layer of deeply uncomfortable drama to an already controversial project. The story was no longer just about fan disapproval or questionable creative choices, it morphed into something juicier, something more tabloid-worthy, a potential celebrity catfight in a production seemingly plagued by internal conflict. The negative publicity intensified, and the sense that something was deeply amiss within the Snow White camp grew stronger with each new leak and whisper.
even if everything worked perfectly, it would have been almost impossible for this movie to succeed because you're comparing it to one of the most beloved films of all time and a truly groundbreaking movie.
You don't particularly see people who, look like me or are me playing roles like that. So it was definitely, when it got announced,
White! He wasn't a stalker, by the way.
Thing that was like trending on Twitter for days because all of the people were angry.
As the online storm raged and the rumors of on-set drama intensified, all eyes turned to Disney, waiting to see how the media giant would respond. Would they issue a reassuring statement, attempt to clarify Rachel Zegler's controversial remarks, launch a charm offensive to win back skeptical fans? The answer, surprisingly, was largely silence, or perhaps more accurately, a form of damage control that ultimately backfired, amplifying the very problems it was intended to solve. Instead of directly addressing the growing concerns head-on, reports suggest Disney opted for a strategy of minimizing Rachel Zegler's public profile, essentially attempting to muzzle the perceived source of the controversy. Talk show invitations were allegedly quietly rescinded. Promotional segments that were likely in the works were abruptly canceled. Even rumors of a grand musical showcase at Disney World designed to build excitement mysteriously vanished. A general air of corporate panic, or at least extreme caution, seemed to descend upon the Snow White project. The intention was likely to prevent any further inflammatory remarks from Zegler and to regain some semblance of control over the rapidly spiraling narrative. But this strategy of silence and suppression had the opposite effect. It fueled speculation that Disney knew they had a serious problem on their hands, that the controversy was far deeper than they were letting on. The canceled appearances became yet another headline, another point of contention, and another reason for audiences to collectively raise an eyebrow and wonder just what exactly was going on behind the heavily guarded gates of this Snow White remake. The silence was deafening, and in Hollywood, silence in the face of a PR crisis rarely translates to anything positive.
It's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White.
That laugh.
That is
not going to be saved by
You
the
wrote
prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can.
It was supposed to come out like a year and a half ago, and then we went after them so hard because of their variety of ridiculous sins that they actually went into full-scale reshoots on Snow White when we announced that we had a competitor.
Then, just when it seemed the Snow White saga couldn't get any more surreal, the unthinkable happened. South Park, the animated comedy institution renowned for its fearless satire and its uncanny ability to dissect and lampoon pop culture phenomena, decided to weigh in, and they didn't just offer a gentle nudge or a playful jab, they unleashed a full-scale comedic assault, dedicating an entire episode to brutally skewering the Snow White fiasco. The South Park treatment is legendary and often brutal, and in this case, it was no different. The episode featured a caricature of Rachel Zegler, a cartoon version exaggerated to the point of absurdity, depicted as an unhinged, self-absorbed diva. This animated Zegler was shown berating everyone around her, spouting over-the-top criticisms of the original 1937 film, and proclaiming that her new Snow White was on a mission to save society, all while completely dismissing the opinions of her co-stars, the fictional Disney executives, and, well, pretty much everyone else. The episode was a comedic Molotov cocktail thrown directly into the already raging fire of the Snow White controversy. It went viral almost instantaneously. Memes featuring the South Park caricature of Zegler exploded across social media. Clips from the episode were dissected, shared, and reshared endlessly, turning the controversy into inescapable internet fodder. Suddenly, the Snow White debate wasn't just confined to niche online forums or entertainment news websites. South Park had catapulted it into the absolute mainstream of pop culture consciousness. Reports quickly surfaced that Rachel Zegler was, unsurprisingly, livid about the portrayal. Sources close to her camp claimed she felt blindsided, and that the comedic attack was adding insult to injury in what was already a deeply challenging and stressful situation. Whether or not Zegler truly felt as depicted in the cartoon was almost irrelevant. The comedic jab, however exaggerated and satirical, resonated with a public already primed to question the direction of the remake, and perhaps even to find some cathartic humor in the unfolding train wreck. South Park, in its signature style, had not only amplified the controversy, but had also, in the eyes of many, solidified a certain public perception of the entire affair.
The original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so. There's a big focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her.
Say it louder so your other eye can hear you.
As an actor, You don't get to dictate anything. You don't get to dictate if a film actually happens. You don't get to dictate when it is shot, how it is shot, if you can ever speak about it to the public. You are simply just there to show up and say your lines and look the way they want you to look.
But the Snow White meltdown, amplified by South Park's satirical spotlight, wasn't just about one actress or one cartoon episode. It exposed deeper, more systemic problems brewing within the very foundations of the House of Mouse. The controversy became a glaring and highly public symptom of broader anxieties and struggles facing Disney as a corporate entity. Underperforming box office releases for major tentpole films, ongoing challenges with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and a growing sense of general remake fatigue amongst audiences were already weighing heavily on the company. Bob Iger, brought back out of retirement as CEO to, in essence, right the ship and steer Disney back to calmer waters, suddenly found himself facing a PR nightmare of fairytale proportions. The Snow White fiasco, with its layers of controversy and now comedic mockery, became a potent symbol of Disney's perceived struggles to navigate the delicate balance of modernizing its classic intellectual property without alienating its core audience, and perhaps more importantly, without losing the very magic that made those properties so beloved in the first place. The cartoon episode, while ostensibly targeting the Snow White remake, inadvertently shone a harsh light on Disney's corporate apparatus itself. South Park depicted bungling executives frantic to spin any new development, calling emergency meetings to hush the star's comments, and scrambling to salvage marketing strategies, only to be constantly confounded by the unstoppable tide of negative press and public opinion. While obviously an exaggerated comedic scenario, it resonated with a widely circulated narrative of real-life leadership gridlock and strategic missteps at Disney's highest levels. For some observers, the Snow White debacle wasn't just about a single film, it was becoming a case study in corporate crisis management or perhaps mismanagement at a time when the stakes for Disney were higher than they had been in years.
The kind of Disney magic that had depth, that had absolute, it was riveting, and it's based, of course, on a Brothers Grimm story.
God forbid a woman dream about true love. We're all just sitting around here, maybe I could be president one day. I hate men, I just want to be president. That screams Disney princess. Oh my God, I'm literally getting enraged. Once again, I feel like I'm back in 2022.
So where does all of this leave everyone involved in the Snow White saga? The fallout from this unfolding media spectacle is still very much in progress. For Rachel Zegler, the immediate consequences are clear. The relentless controversy risks overshadowing her burgeoning career, potentially transforming her from a promising young talent into a lightning rod for divisive debate rather than a universally admired star. Her association with the Snow White remake, now inextricably linked with negative headlines and comedic ridicule, could impact future casting decisions and public perception for years to come. For Disney, the brand damage, while perhaps not irreparable, is undeniable. The fiasco raises serious questions about their current approach to remaking beloved franchises and whether their attempts at modernization are ultimately backfiring, alienating loyal fans and generating more negative buzz than positive anticipation. And for the future of remakes in Hollywood in general, the Snow White story might serve as a turning point, a stark cautionary tale illustrating how quickly good intentions and attempts at contemporary relevance can spiral into public relations disasters and potentially box office bombs. Adding another layer of uncertainty to the already chaotic situation are persistent rumors of potential legal action. Whispers have circulated that Zegler's representatives have quietly explored possible legal recourse against Disney, alleging that the company's handling of the controversy, particularly the cancellation of promotional appearances, may have violated aspects of her contract. Whether these are genuine threats or simply negotiating tactics remains unclear, but even the possibility of a lawsuit between a rising star and a Hollywood titan like Disney only adds more fuel to the already roaring firestorm surrounding Snow White 2025.
And this started with the movie star Rachel Zegler, who I believe would be categorized as a loudmouth dope.
Yeah, the entire film's about a love story. It's about a love story because that's what the point of the film is, and I'm sorry that chivalry in a man pursuing you is now deemed as stalking, which now it's kind of making sense why men are opting out of the dating scene.
But amidst the storm of headlines, comedic parodies, and online outrage, it's crucial to step back and consider a perspective often lost in the noise: Rachel Zegler's own. While her initial comments about the original Snow White certainly ignited the initial spark of controversy, were they entirely devoid of context? Looking beyond the sound bites, some argue that Zegler's intentions, however clumsily expressed, might have been rooted in a genuine desire to create a Snow White for a modern audience, a heroine who resonates with contemporary values and expectations. In a media landscape saturated with reboots and reimaginings, the pressure to offer a fresh take to avoid simply replicating the past is immense. Perhaps Zegler felt compelled to emphasize the ways in which the 1937 film, viewed through a 21st century lens, might appear, well, dated. Her comments about the prince as a stalker, while inflammatory to some, could be interpreted as a critique of outdated romantic tropes, a push for a more empowered and independent female lead. It's also worth noting the intense pressure young actors, especially those thrust into the spotlight of a major Disney franchise, face in today's hypercritical social media environment. Every word is scrutinized, every interview clip dissected, and nuance can be easily lost in the rapid-fire cycle of online discourse. Some of Zegler's defenders have pointed to her youth and relative inexperience navigating the treacherous waters of Hollywood PR. They argue that she may have been unprepared for the ferocity of the backlash, and that her attempts to articulate a modern vision for Snow White were misinterpreted and unfairly amplified by those eager to find fault with the remake from the outset. Regardless of whether one agrees with her specific phrasing or overall approach, acknowledging the potential for misinterpretation and the pressure cooker environment surrounding the production adds a layer of complexity to the narrative, moving beyond a simplistic portrayal of Zegler as solely responsible for the entire Snow White meltdown. The story, like most Hollywood dramas, is rarely black and white, and understanding the different shades of gray is essential to grasping the full picture.
I was scared of the original cartoon. I think I watched it once and then I never picked it up again. I watched it for the first time in probably 16, 17 years.
The Snow White saga, with all its twists and turns, ultimately serves as a fascinating case study in the broader challenges facing Hollywood in the age of constant reboots and franchise revivals. Disney, in particular, has built a significant portion of its modern empire on reimagining its classic animated films for new generations. While some of these efforts have been met with critical and commercial success, others have stumbled, and Snow White appears to be teetering precariously on the edge of disaster. The core issue at play is the incredibly delicate tightrope walk that studios must navigate when attempting to modernize beloved properties. On one hand, there's the undeniable pressure to innovate, to offer something new, to avoid simply churning out carbon copies of films that already exist and are readily available. Audiences, particularly younger demographics, often demand contemporary themes, updated sensibilities, and characters that reflect the diversity and values of the present day. On the other hand, there's the immense risk of alienating the core fanbase, the legions of viewers who hold deep emotional connections to the original versions, who cherish the nostalgia and the specific elements that made those films iconic in the first place. Stray too far from the source material and you risk accusations of ruining a classic, of prioritizing wokeness over genuine storytelling, and of disrespecting a cultural heritage. Cling too closely to the original and you risk being labeled as outdated, unimaginative, and irrelevant to a contemporary audience. Snow White 2025 seems to have become a lightning rod for these very tensions, a project caught in the crossfire of conflicting expectations and deeply entrenched opinions about what a modern fairy tale should look like. The controversy surrounding the film isn't just about one actress's comments or one cartoon parody, it's a reflection of a larger cultural debate about the very nature of reboots, the balance between honoring tradition and embracing innovation, and the increasingly fraught relationship between Hollywood studios and their intensely invested and often highly critical global audience. The fate of Snow White may ultimately hinge on whether it can somehow bridge this divide, appealing to both the nostalgic hearts of longtime fans and the contemporary sensibilities of a new generation. But as the controversy continues to swirl, the path to that fairy tale ending looks increasingly precarious.
On the original production, I was scared of it. Oh, it was so weird. It was the stalker. Like, I feel like if you are taking on the most iconic Disney role ever, genuinely, like this was the most prolific Disney film, I feel like you should kind of have some sort of reverence for the original production.
Can anything ultimately salvage Snow White now? Will audiences, bombarded with months of negative press, controversy, and comedic mockery, be able to somehow look past the storm and judge the finished film on its own artistic merits? Or is this remake already irrevocably doomed to be remembered not as a charming fairy tale reimagining, but as a cautionary tale of Hollywood hubris, corporate indecision, and comedic annihilation? The ultimate answer, as is often the case in Hollywood, will likely come down to cold, hard box office numbers. If, against all odds, the film manages to connect with audiences, delivering breathtaking visuals, compelling performances, or a surprisingly resonant story, perhaps word of mouth can still pull off a miracle. But as each new twist emerges, each canceled appearance, each fresh rumor of on-set shouting match, and each subsequent comedic jab from late-night television or animated satire piles up, the likelihood of a fairy tale ending for this particular Snow White remake seems to dwindle with each passing day. One thing, however, is certain. The Snow White saga, and particularly the role that South Park's parody played in amplifying its controversies, has become a modern-day media spectacle, a fascinating and frankly quite shocking example of how swiftly a seemingly straightforward Hollywood remake can transform into a real-life and very public meltdown.